Hello, everybody. I'm Rachel Phillips Beck, Senior VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. You've joined us for another episode of Cap and Gown. Thank you all for spending time with us to talk about things that are going on in higher education. Let's see. I'm solo today. Matt is on his way to Seattle, his old stomping ground. So he is fully prepared for that city to be very friendly since they won the Super Bowl, which we know how that can change a town. So he's looking forward to that. I'm fresh back from Orlando. Went and did some retention work for ABHE. And then a couple of weeks before that, our team was in Dallas for the CCCU International Forum, which is always amazing. Not only nice to see our clients, but also to spend time with the team that I don't always get to be around. So that was very fun. Let's see, anything else that I want to tell you about? I don't think so. I'm excited because today we are going to be diving into our book of the year, which is How to Know a Person. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between being a diminisher and an illuminator, which I bet you can guess which kind of person I prefer. But before we jump into that, let me give you some insight on the State of the Union. All right, y'all, it's that time of the year where we talk about FAFSA. The good news is that we have good news about FAFSA, which we haven't had in about 2 years since their new rollout. But the high school class of 2026 has completed a collective 1.6 million federal student aid applications, the FAFSA applications for the 2026-2027 school year. That is of almost a month ago. So we're just continuing to see that improve and increase. The U.S. Department of Education, which is over the FAFSA process, says that it has processed a total of 7.6 million applications, including for the high school class of 2026. And they're pretty happy. They're seeing an increase in activity. This time 2 years ago, not a single student had completed the FAFSA. So we're really making a lot of inroads in kind of what was a mess. Let's see, some other things I want to tell you. Illinois has the highest high school class completion rate of FAFSAs at 52%. Other states with top completion rates include Texas with 49 and New Jersey with 48. But there's some other things that the government is talking about with FAFSA. Not only are people filling it out, but they're very satisfied with their experience. So coming out of this think tank, they did a survey. 96% of the people who filled out the FAFSA are satisfied. That's up from 94% for last cycle's form. And a slightly smaller share, 92%, said that the FAFSA is taking a reasonable amount of time for them to complete. So that's very helpful. Also, remember, in 2024, roughly 3/4 of the calls to the education department weren't answered. That was in that first 5 months of rollout where people were like, I need guidance and I'm not sure what's happening here. Now, our wait times for the current cycle are under 1 minute on average, and they are getting received and managed. So that is the good news with FAFSA. We like to see that. It's going to make our people in financial aid much happier. They're going to have a much better spring than they have for the last 2 years. And I love the idea that our students are getting that in early so that they can make really informed choices about where they go. So that's your FAFSA good news. Also, there's an article in Inside Higher Ed talking about how state higher ed officials are doing away with the term non-credit, which you guys know I love language, and it's just what we call things is so important. You know, I've waged this war against calling our students who are trying to decide on their major undeclared. If it were just a matter of declaring, then they would do it, but it's much more complicated. They're in a very serious process. I also don't love undecided because a lot of our students are undecided, even if they have a major. So I always talk about those students deciding. They're in a process that they're going through, and we need to honor that process. This article is about the same thing, except with this term non-credit, that a lot of schools are calling those developmental courses early. So I really appreciate this article talking about there aren't many things in life that get described as what they're not. So like these are not credits is the most important thing for you to know, versus what they actually are, which is helping our students learn and grow. Louisiana has done away with the term non-credit. Now they're calling them validated skills and learning. Let's see, skills training is another one, but really this is about making sure that we're not doing deficit framing around those early courses. Unfortunately, on some campuses, students who are seeking these skills training in order to move on to college credit, they actually sometimes are being treated differently. Like they're not getting student IDs, or they don't have the same access to things like tutoring or your LMS, all of those resources. So I think the gist of this is just that we want our students to have a good name, because we don't want them to question, like, if this is non-credit, then why am I taking this? We need to be able to describe to them in the name why it's called what it is and why you should take it. And then also just laying those courses on the table and having a real conversation about what should we call them, how do students experience them, and how are we making sure that our processes and our support of those students is in line with the hard work that they're doing in those courses. So I love that. I think it's worth thinking through what you call. You remember the other one that we talked about is academic probation, which sounds very crabby. But if we talk about academic recovery, then our students have this opportunity to do well and go from good to great. So I love when we're thoughtful about language. Another article coming out of Inside Higher Ed talks about how we need to be tracking not just degrees, but also the payoff of those degrees for our students. So there's always debates about workforce needs and economic mobility, and the Lumina Foundation is tracking which Americans are earning credentials and which of those are actually paying off. So they did a Stronger Nations report 2024, the report shows that 43.6% of U.S. adults aged 25 to 64 in the labor force have a college degree or another credential, such as a certificate. They are earning more than someone with only a high school diploma. So 43.6 of the ones that they looked at. This is really around the idea that our students are saying, not only can I get a credential, whether that's a certificate or a college degree, but also what is going to lead me to have a better job. So the nice thing about this study this year is that it's going to establish a national baseline for the Lumina Foundation's 2040 goal, which is that 75% of adults in the U.S. labor force will have a college degree or credentialing beyond high school that leads to economic prosperity, which is defined as earning at least 15% more than someone with only a high school diploma. So that is their goal for 2040. And this is going to be our benchmark. Let's see, 70% of U.S. adults with bachelor's degrees earn at least 15% more than those with only high school diplomas. And that share rises roughly to 80% for those with graduate or professional degrees. So lots of good information around that. And just thinking about how are we looking at economic mobility instead of just our graduation rates, and some really, I think, important measurements around that. Okay, I've got two more for you. This one is about student loneliness, which you remember, you guys, we're always talking about what were the developmental years that sets of students missed because of COVID. So like, were you in kindergarten when that happened? Or were you in middle school or early high school or late high school? Where were you when you had this period of time where you weren't able to have your normal socialization because we were all staying home and doing Zoom? Well, a lot of our students who are showing up to colleges now had this piece where typically they would be learning how to make friends and how to connect and how to have communities and, be good friends to other people. They missed that building block. And so we're seeing a lot of students where loneliness is really shaping their campus life. This report coming out of Trellis Strategies says that more than half of college students say they feel lonely. So 44,000 college students found that 57% of students said they felt lonely. Only 15% of them said that they never feel lonely. This is an issue on college campuses that's affecting more students than you would think at first glance. The report found that students who frequently experience loneliness are far more likely to self-report symptoms of anxiety and depression, and to say they feel less supported by their institution than their peers who reported rarely feeling lonely. So this kind of ties into and connects to all of our conversation around student belonging. How can you feel like you belong in a place where you don't have anyone to be around and you're feeling really lonely? So I think it's an important thing to think about, and how we're going to address this with our students. In this report, it says students now spend about 70% less time with their peers in person than they did 2 decades ago, which is really remarkable. I was just talking to a campus and they were saying, they're noticing students are having a harder time with things like small talk or getting connected in particular places. And so we had a great conversation with the group just about how we have to teach students how to do that. We have to model it. We have to give them opportunities to do it, but also give them a little tough love because it feels uncomfortable. They're not used to having to make friends in that way. They have much more sort of quantity of connection through social media than quality of connection in real life. And we all know that social media connections can be very shallow sometimes and not actually fulfilling, not make us feel less lonely, but in some cases can actually make us feel more lonely. So I think there's a lot of resourcing that we can do around that on our campus as we become more aware that that's a problem. And then finally, I want to talk about advising. So this is coming out of the University of Virginia. They just did a whole study about what to do about advising. So basically their students were like, we are really satisfied. 94% of their students were satisfied with their overall academic experience, but only 64 of them reported satisfaction with their advising experience. So they just started to hear from everybody like, hey, it's not really going great. We have a lot of students who are going in the wrong thing and they don't know who their advisor is because they're not connecting with them at all. Like they've never met them and then they've got to have this meeting with them and they don't blow right. So what they decided to do, which you guys will remember you heard from Pikeville, is they took their professional advisors and they made those the U100 teachers so that you are paired with your advisor. And then they wove into that first year seminar course a lot of things around advising, choosing your major, confirming your major, understanding your degree plan, having a snapshot of your 4 years and what you're going to take when. And it really improved a student experience. So they obviously have very good relationships with their advisors. And the frame of this job on this campus is that advising is not just giving students a roadmap and then the rules of the road and then pointing out all of the pitfalls. It's actually about helping them learn how to create a pathway for themselves. So I love that. Whenever we're talking about advising you guys, I think it is so interesting how on different campuses that's described. And I always say there's kind of 3 elements of advising. We have degree plan specialist, which is we want somebody to know the ins and outs of scheduling classes and when do they come and if they're only offered in the fall, and help me make sure that I'm not wasting my time and my money by giving me a clear schedule. That's a part of advising degree planning, right? And then we have success coaching, which is like, I'm your person. Any question you have, I will use my connections and my understanding of our resources on campus to get you to the right place. And also I'm cheering for you. I have unconditional positive regard. And if something goes wrong or you have a question, come and see me and I'll walk alongside you with that. And then the third piece that we think about is our faculty mentoring. So valuable to have that faculty time, especially in your discipline, to talk about what the future looks like and positions you might consider and get you connected in a very professional way. But sometimes I think we try to mush all of those things together, and you might have someone who's good at one of them, but not the other 2, or vice versa. And so really defining the work of advising and then making sure how we get our freshmen engaged with those advisors very, very early so they can help them walk the path to success, I think is so important. So, all right, that is the state of the union. I get to talk today about our book. For those of you who don't remember, we are doing David Brooks' book, How to Know a Person. This has been a popular choice on our team, on the Ferris team. We always talk about the books that we're going to do over the year. And then this is one that I think everybody on our team has gotten and is ahead of me in, which is really nice because we can have good conversations about it. But this idea of how do we see each other deeply and really maintain presence with those that we're working with instead of just kind of going through your day and not paying attention. So we actually today are going to talk about being a diminisher. Z was saying beforehand, like, Rachel, this is depressing. Do you want to talk about it? And I was like, yeah, we're only going to talk about it this one time. Fortunately, the rest of the book is about being an illuminator and giving you very specific tips for how you can do that. But today I have to define diminishing for us. And there's a couple of traits that come into play as you're thinking about people you know that are diminishers, or I would say all of us at some point can really wrestle with this, right? All of us at some point have been too busy or too overwhelmed or stressed or burnout, and we are not cultivating attention to the people that we're with. So I want to talk about some of those things. And like I said, the rest of the time when we talk about this book, we're going to be talking about how to cultivate being an illuminator, which is somebody who sees people very, very deeply that they're present with. So when we talk about diminisher tendencies, these are all habits or ways of thinking about other people that diminish our ability to connect authentically with our students, with our coworkers, with our colleagues. These are all ways that we kind of get our brain off track when we're trying to think about how we pay attention to what other people are bringing to the table. So one of the very first things that you can do that will make you a diminisher, and again, I don't think most of us are like this all the time, but I do want you to be listening for like, oh, that's one that when I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed and hurried and I don't have the time to give attention what I need to, this is really where that's coming from. Okay, so you might take some notes about yourself as I go through these. All right, the very first one is sizing people up. So this is quickly judging based on surface cues, things like a student's major or GPA or how they present themselves in their first meeting. So you guys know I'm always talking about with our leading indicators. These are things that are true about our students that we can know before they ever come to campus. But we have to be really, really careful because they don't tell us the whole story. They only tell us one little piece of that. And we actually split those leading indicators into situational and then individual. So a situational thing actually might be something like their family background or their extracurricular activities or their external commitments. Whereas their individual characteristics are things like aptitudes, skills and abilities, openness to change. So we want to think about this sizing people up. We can very quickly be like, oh, I know about you because I know something about you. You're first generation, obviously, you're going to need this kind of information. The problem with this is that it doesn't give us the ability to provide holistic support because we've already done a shortcut measure and we are not being curious and digging into what's actually going on with that student. You remember, you guys, that we also did this book, Seek and How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. This is another one that talks about showing up to your engagements with people without this sort of preconceived idea of who they are based on some little things that you know. I've sized you up and I know all about you. You want to come in with some curiosity and some openness around that. Remember, a lot of these things are also coming out of danger brain, right? So when we're tired or we're overwhelmed or we're not sure what we're doing, our brain can kind of switch into this place where we're not looking for connection. We're actually not looking to know each other deeply. We are just trying to use shortcuts to get through our day because there are so many things for us to do. Obviously, that is not a way to make your students feel seen and cared for on your campus. That's a way to communicate to them, I'm busy and I don't have time for what's going on with you. So, okay, first one, sizing people up. I know about you because you are whatever. You come from this state because you have this GPA. I already know all about you. That makes you a diminisher. It means you are not listening deeply for what is true about that student. The next one is egotism, which is when our self-centeredness blocks our curiosity about others. So you guys, when I think about this, I always think about middle school. You know how everyone in middle school is so concerned with themselves? Like, what do other people think about me? And am I showing up in the right way? And do I have the right shoes? And am I saying the right thing? And whatever. And the truth is, everybody is only thinking about themselves, which means they are not looking at each other, right? They're not really, they're so caught up in what's going on in their brain that there's not space for them to be open and curious about what's happening with others. So this idea of being too focused on your own expertise or agenda can mean that you actually miss what is really, really happening with people. So I think about this. You guys know I'm always talking about this expert role, which is one way that we can honor our students and our colleagues by not being so self-centered that shows up in a meeting or, coffee with somebody and is like, I have an agenda and I'm going to run it. But actually that you show up and you say, I have a lot of expertise about the rhythm of the academic year and about resources that can help you in your higher education journey. And also, I have a lot of expertise because I'm a counselor in being mindful and choosing joy. And I've got a whole toolkit. But it's also very important to say to whoever you're talking to, you are an expert in you. I can't begin to know how you feel and what's going on in your head. And so as I show up with these resources, I also need to hear from you what your experience is, what you need, how this came about, the places where you're really struggling. And we're going to show up as two whole people and have that conversation instead of me saying like, here's what we're going to do. Just stick with me. And I promise we're going to do this. When you approach a student in that way, where you're like, I have an agenda and I have expertise, come with me, you make students feel like they're fitting into somebody else's story instead of them creating their pathway to development, right? So when we talk about listening to students and making sure that they're able to create this path forward in advising, we're not just telling you what to do, we're actually helping you develop into the kind of person who can create those plans for you as well. So I love that. Okay, sizing people up. First of all, next, egotism. The third one is anxiety. And this is, I actually really like this definition because I think beyond us being anxious, just in general, this is really talking about internal noise that comes from your own workload, compassion fatigue, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear that you don't have the expertise and so you have to show up as an expert so that they will have confidence in you. All of that anxiety gets tangled up into the way that you talk about other people, the way that you see them. And you can rush through something because you're feeling all of that noise and all of that workload, and you can miss things that are really, really important. So you think about like a Res Life staff member who has all of these crises going on. And so they're just rushing through check-in and not actually looking at the student in front of them and being like, hey, is everything okay? What's going on with you? I want to assess and I want to see you deeply. I want to really understand what's happening with you. So in my family, we call this manager mode. When I'm in manager mode, I really am not present at all. I have a bunch of things that are going on in my brain and I'm not very present. And I think I've told you guys before that this happened to me last time I moved, where I said to my daughter, like, hey, I am not going to be present, but I love you. So I need you occasionally to come over and just put your hand on me. And then I'll come to and I'll look at you and be like, oh, hi, how's it going today? Are you having a good day? Right? I want to see you deeply. But when I have this internal noise going on, I am straight in manager mode and I'm not doing a good job of paying attention to people that I love and seeing them really deeply. So remember, coming out of slow productivity, that we want to do slow and excellent work. And the way that we do that when we're engaging with our students is to not be so overwhelmed with the tasks that we miss seeing our student in front of us. I also think it's helpful to say here, I'm always asking our schools, how do you define the work that you're supposed to do? So you can think about something like advising, where you could define as very transactional. You're going to come, you're going to give me your code, I'm going to help you build your schedule, and you're going to go. And if we define it that way, then what your brain is doing while you're having that transactional engagement with the student is you're busy. You're trying to make sure that you do all the things right and that you've got the right schedule for them. And you for sure should be doing that. But if we define that job as, yes, I need you to have the right schedule, but this time that I'm spending with you is going to be transformational. I'm going to be very present with you. I'm going to make sure I see you and ask you questions about what's actually happening with you. That changes the way that you approach that. And so I am always asking our practitioners, help me understand. I want you to articulate what your job is. And if you articulate that it's just a transactional job, there may be some things that you're missing there where you would have the opportunity to see students more deeply. I think about a campus that Matt and I visited where there's a woman who works in the coffee shop, right? And her job, transactional, her job is to sell coffee, right? To ring up, to make the coffee, to take the money, to go on to the next one. Well, that's not how she would have defined her job, because I watched her, every student who came up to her, she saw them deeply. She was like, how was your test from yesterday? I know you were really anxious about it. How was your trip home? Did you see your parents? Are you recovering? I know you had the flu. You seem to be feeling so much better. She made that job transformational instead of defining it as transactional. And one of the ways she did that is she took all of the noise and just said, no, this is an opportunity for me in this little moment to do some mentoring and to make sure our students feel like they belong, like they're not lonely, and they have somebody who will celebrate with them. So I love that. Let's not let our anxiety get in the way, or huge workloads, or 50 hats that you're having to wear. Let's not have that get in the way of really seeing other people deeply. All right, the next one we call naive realism. So this is where you assume that you are right, that your view is right, that your perspective is right. And so everybody else should see it the same way. Like, yeah, well, I see things correctly. So objectively, you should see things the same way that I do, right? So this is really interesting to me because I think so often it comes out of a good place. I think about if you're an introvert and you're talking to an extrovert and they're like, hey, just get involved in all of the clubs like I did because it's going to help build leadership and it'll give you a community. Well, if that's an extrovert saying that to an introvert, I'm like, I have no interest in that. So I don't know why you're saying that's a good idea. You actually haven't taken any minute to think about or ask me about what I actually would enjoy or like. So I think that can be a really big problem, just feeling like your perspective is the only perspective that lives there. I have two examples for you. The first one, you guys have heard me talk before about my freshman experience during Welcome Week, which was 100% created by somebody not like me. And they had this sort of naive realism, which is like everybody is going to want to walk into a huge party in Moody Coliseum where all of the upperclassmen have signs and they're yelling and there's loud music. And then you have to find your U100 group and everyone's sharing. Okay, that is my biggest nightmare. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. And I was like, what is happening? Never mind. I'm going to go home. Right. That's such a great example of somebody being like, everyone's going to love that because doesn't that sound like fun? And I'm like, no, that's awful. I would rather die. You kind of compare that to, at the same time, our IT department, all of the students who were information science or IT or programming, all of those students, their faculty were like, they're never going to want to walk into this huge party that's going on. So we are going to have our own orientation where we're going to sit around and play video games together. We don't have to talk to each other. It's not going to be loud. We're going to be doing things that we already want to do. And that's tailored to our students because we see them deeply and we understand that's not going to be attractive to them, right? So I love that idea of just saying, wow, somebody who's sitting in a different place is going to think about this really differently. And the only way to engage with that is to ask people, what do you think about this? It's why we do things like have, what do you call those when you have a bunch of people and you ask them something groups? I can't remember what it's called. What is that called, Z? What am I thinking? Focus groups. Focus groups. It's why we have focus groups, because we have a bunch of people sitting around being like, here's my perspective. Here's my perspective. Okay, one more example for you. Years ago when I went to jury duty, I got there really, really early and I sat in the very back row because that is my preference. That's where I want to sit. I don't want to be in the front. And right when jury duty was about to start, another woman came in. The room was packed and there was a seat next to me, and she came back to sit with me. She sat down right next to me and she said, well, I guess this seat is what happens when you get here late. You got to sit in the back row. And I was like, I got here early so I could sit in the back row, right? Two totally different perspectives. She's like, this is terrible. I have to sit back here. And I'm like, I went to great lengths to make sure I was sitting back here. So just make sure that you are present and thinking about other people's realities. That's a way to be an illuminator instead of a diminisher. Okay, stick with me. Have a couple more. So one is lesser mind problems, which I find this one so fascinating. This is the idea that because we are privy to our entire inner complex conversation that's happening in our brain, we think we are the most complicated person on the planet. We have all these nuances and intricacies, and we're really thinking through, all of these different pieces because we hear all of that going on. Whereas what we know about another person is just what they say or what they make transparent, right? So we don't have all of that chatter that's happening in their brains, which means that we can underestimate that those things are actually happening. We are so aware of what's going on with us. We can just kind of think, well, there's nothing happening there. They're not complex. They don't have a story to tell, which obviously can lead to some really shallow interventions that don't actually address the root needs of our students. So here's a really interesting perspective on this. When I was advising, one time I had a superstar student who was Hispanic come, and he was like, I need to talk to you. I have a full ride to go get my PhD in psychology, and I just need to decide whether or not that's what I want to do. So he's doing a great job. He loves the community. He has a free ride to go get his PhD. And I was like, I don't even understand what the question is. Like, what are we talking about? What's the holdup? Which is so helpful because he then can unpack all the complexities of that. The fact that he's a first generation student, that his parents don't really understand why you would keep going to school when you could now get a job using your college degree. Like, why do we have to keep doing more education? What is a PhD? Like, being a doctor, how does that help you at all? So laying out all of these complexities about how he's thinking about this problem. If I showed up and I was like, obviously, it's not very complicated, you should go do this thing, I would have missed this whole incredible story and tapestry of things that were going on in his head that he was balancing and measuring and weighing to make good decisions. So just remember, you hear the complexity in your head, you don't hear it in other people's, and that means you have to be present and ask to really understand what they're struggling with and wrestling with and trying to balance. All right. Also objectivism. So this is when we lean too heavily on data trends. Everybody knows this is just the case. Everybody knows that our students who are athletes are not doing a good job, right? Everybody knows that. Well, actually, we need to have individual conversations with our students to fully understand what's going on. You guys, I see this come to the surface. My example is always about academic recovery. So we have a student who didn't do well academically last semester. And on some campuses, it's like, well, when you come in on academic recovery, here's what you have to do. You have to take this class. You have to go to tutoring. You have to meet with your success coach. We have to do every 2 weeks, we're going to check your grades, whatever your process is, right? Well, the hardship of that is if we're not listening to our students, if we're being diminishers instead of illuminators on their experience and their story, we've made some really big assumptions about why their academics were struggling and not taking into account what actually happened with them. So if we have a student and you say, help me understand what happened last semester, and they're like, my sister was really sick. I was overwhelmed. I was distracted. I didn't do a good job. She's doing much better now, but it's just, I couldn't focus on my academics. Awesome. Then we're not going to make you do a thing that doesn't relate to your actual experience, you don't have to go to tutoring. You don't have to take this class. Just why don't you meet with me once a week and we'll just make sure you're doing okay, right? So that idea of not leaning too heavily on the data, it does give us some information, but actually asking what is your unique experience that's going to help us with those really deep interventions that are going to address development issues or personal issues is incredibly important. Essentialism, this is where people say I'm going to stereotype groups with an essential nature. So everybody who is, like I said, an athlete prioritizes athletics over academics, or first generation students always need basic skills or basic help. These are things that everybody just knows, but so often if you take it back to the data and you say, where did you get that? Where did that come from? A lot of times it's just ad hoc, right? Just everybody knows that, anecdotal. So we want to think about what data are we looking at so that we can really understand our individuals' journeys and make sure that we're not sort of generalizing to all of our students when everybody's different and everybody is going to have a different experience. All right, the last one I have for you is the static mindset. You might recognize this as the opposite of growth mindset. Our friend Carol Dweck, who taught us all about growth mindset. Static mindset is viewing students as fixed rather than evolving. So when we have freshmen who come in who are academically underprepared, who didn't do well their first semester, who are having a hard time making friends or joining community or switching over into connection brain, we can say, well, this is who they are, and they're just never going to get better at this. They're not going to be able to be successful in the academics in college, and they're never going to have a community around people because they're just not good at that. Or we can do what student development does really well, which is say, those are places where we are going to grow and we're going to practice. And by the end of this 4 years, my expectation would be that you will have grown quite a bit into a different person as you practice and try on new skills. Static mindset says you are who you are, and there is no good reason to do mentoring or to have hope that things are going to change because there's nothing to be done. You just are who you are, which isn't that depressing? I would hope that anybody who sort of analyzes that idea would be like, that's a terrible idea. Let's not stick with it. But I think, like I said before, sometimes when you're in stress and you're feeling very overwhelmed, that might be a place where you fall into, it's always going to be like this. There's no way that this person's going to grow or learn or change. So the conclusion of this chapter on diminishers, just how we have these barriers to showing up in a way that we can fully see our students, says you can be loved by a person and yet not be known by them, which I think is so important. I think about this idea of we all have students that we're rooting for and that we really want to support and that we're, in the journey with. But the truth is that if we are not open and curious to what's going on with them, we actually could miss the most important things about those students. Even though we have unconditional positive regard for them, we want good things. Think about a couple of years ago, I was talking to a dean of students, and he said in orientation the first semester for his freshmen, he says, if anything is going on with you, if you need someone to talk to, if you need a friend or you're feeling overwhelmed, come and talk to me. I want to be a resource for you. So a couple of weeks went by, a couple of months into the spring semester, this young man comes and knocks on his door and says, hey, you said in orientation if I needed someone to talk to, that I could talk to you. Are you free? And he was like, absolutely, come in, tell me what's happening with you. And they had this whole conversation about his first year and how was he making friends and how was he finding academics and all of that. And then the dean of students said to him, tell me what's weighing on you today. And the student said, well, my dad just died yesterday. He died yesterday. And the dean of students was like, we have been sitting here together for 30 minutes talking about all of these different things. And are you telling me if I hadn't said to you what is weighing on you today that you would have left and you wouldn't have told me that? And he's like, yeah, I didn't know how to bring it up. And so I probably would have left. I feel better after talking to you, but I probably wouldn't have told you. that is such an important moment, right? Because this team of students really loved this student, spent 30 minutes going through all of this stuff with them. But if they hadn't taken a moment to say, help me understand what's weighing on you today, what's hard, what's been the hardest thing about this semester, the student would have a bunch of stuff going on that he never would have been able to engage with him, resource him, help him with that. So I love that example of we can really love our students, but that doesn't mean that we are immune from making mistakes about really being present with them. And usually that's going to come out of times when you feel overwhelmed, burnout, too much work to do. You can kind of pass them. I think a lot of times about parents with their kids. Their kids grow up and they're adults and they have whole lives, right? And yet sometimes I think my parents still think of me as somebody who likes to sleep until noon. And I'm like, well, I wake up at 6:30 every morning. So I've evolved a little bit. You can really love me, but you cannot, that doesn't necessarily mean you know me or that you understand me either. So that idea of how do we make sure that we are really present with our students, and we want to become illuminators. We don't want to be people who don't have enough time to listen to other stories, but actually that we are really present and seeing them. We want to see our students in their fullness. And one thing that I appreciate about this book is that it talks about this in terms of a competency. It's not something that comes naturally to a lot of people. It's some people that's innate, but it is a set of skills that we can practice, that we can invest in, and we can just continue to get better. This idea of being an illuminator or seeing others deeply is really a craft that aligns with this idea of holistic development and belonging and mattering. It's a way that we can help others feel connected to their community and to the work that they do. And we have to practice it. Not everybody is that great at it. I was just doing a session for someone and they're like, how do we help our faculty with this skill? Well, first of all, we talk about it like a skill. Not everybody's going to come to it and it works for them naturally. There are things that we can do and things that we can become aware of that are going to help us develop this skill. So this idea of being an illuminator is the opposite of everything we talked about. Being an illuminator means that you are curious about other people, you ask open questions, and you give them space to be able to respond in the way that you want to or they want to, that you're able to really listen without judgment, that you're listening to understand, not to solve the problem or be like, oh yeah, I know all about that, or look like an expert. You actually are listening so that they can lay out what's important to them. And then also, I think it's so important to model for our students that other people are complex, that it's very rare that someone would say a thing and you'd be like, got it, I know exactly what you mean. Oftentimes we have to dig into that and say, help me understand why that's important. What are you trying to solve? What are the feelings associated with that? What are the hardships? What are the challenges that we're facing? All of those things are going to help us be illuminators and more fully understand what's going on with our students. So you guys know I love a good action item. I have practical tips for you today instead of action items, though. Think about, as you're doing your advising or you're engaging with your students, we want to ask illuminator questions, not diminisher questions. So things like, what crossroads are you at right now? Or if fear wasn't a factor, what would you pursue? Those are ways to hold space for our students to be able to tell the truth about themselves and to receive our deep seeing of them. You think about this idea of how you quiet your own anxiety. So before you go into a situation that may short circuit your ability to see someone else because you're overwhelmed and you've got too many things going on, or you're not sure you know the answer. We have to be able to quiet our own anxieties before we connect with our students. So I was just talking to a woman. She has this really beautiful practice. She's actually in the Title IX office, and she has a deck of cards that have like wisdom, wise sayings, and other sort of, I think some of it's scripture, but mindfulness things. And before a student comes in to talk about Title IX, she has them draw a card, and then they just spend the first couple of minutes talking through what does that wisdom mean and how does it apply for you. And then the next time the student comes to see her, she asks again about it. Hey, we were talking about this wisdom. How did you see that this week? It's such a nice way to start off with This is not going to be a hurried space. This is not going to be a space where my agenda is pushing everything. Actually, this is a space where I want for us to be open, connected to each other, and I'm going to see you deeply in this scenario that we're walking through. Okay, I said this in slow productivity. It's coming up again. I want you to think about things like your caseload, about how you're getting trained to be present with students, deep listening, cultures on a campus that value relational work over pure metrics. So I love data and I love telling the story of success, but we also have to incentivize hanging around with people, just being slow with them and seeing what comes out of that process. And so challenging some of those things. We know that in student success, this idea of being an illuminator is just not optional. That's not an extra thing in the job. It's actually at the very heart of what we want to do with students. And when students experience being seen fully and they watch you modeling that process of putting your phone away when you talk to them, or walking across campus and looking around to see who's there, or holding space for them to be able to talk about what's going on with them, that develops them into people who are able to then do that because you've modeled those things. And also it helps them on their journey as well. So the question of how we illuminate students, we're going to continue to ask for this year. I think we have lots of opportunities for that. But I also want to challenge you guys to have that list of things that make you not as able to see your students fully. And just when you're feeling stressed, I've said to you before, the reason I quit my job at my university was because I felt like I was not being present with students. They were coming and talking to me and leaving, and the next one and the next one, the next one. And at the end of the day, I was like, I don't think I saw any of those students. I don't think their experience with me was that they felt like there was space or time for them to unpack what was going on with them. I had an agenda and I just had to get through it because I had so many students. And so thinking about times and places where you're stressed, where you're overwhelmed, or you feel anxious, and how can we practice this craft of showing up and really trying to understand what's going on in the complexity of our students with their history and their family and their current experiences is such a valuable gift for us to give them, both to model and so that they can experience it. So let's not be diminishers. Let's be illuminators. Like I said, I think most of you spend your life as illuminators. We're going to talk about all of those individual things that you can cultivate to be a better illuminator. But let's not diminish each other. That's one of my least favorite things. All right, you guys, see what happens when it's just me. I don't have any conversation, so we go much shorter than we typically do when I have a guest. But we are going to be back next week. Dr. Sherry Woosley is going to join us. I'm not going to tell you yet what we're going to talk about, but she is always just such a good thinker and always has such fun and interesting things that she brings us. So that will be really nice to have her next week. And then we'll be well into March the next time we see each other after next week. So thank you guys for joining me and have a great day.